Here's a question. Why do carbs make us hungry? All right, so there's two reasons. One is that when you consume carbs, you spike the hormone insulin, because the purpose of insulin is to remove the carbs from your bloodstream. And the body will then convert that into stored sugar in your liver and your muscles. And if there's excess, it'll convert it to fat in different places in your body. But insulin's job is to lower glucose. Now, when the glucose becomes lower in the blood because you just spiked insulin, this is where you're going to crave more carbs, and also your appetite's going to go up. You're going to be hungry. So that's number one. Low blood sugars will cause you to be hungry. And number two, insulin itself triggers hunger. So the more insulin you have, the more hungry you're going to be. And there's a condition called insulin resistance, and that's created from eating chronic amount of carbs over many years to the point where your body's compensating by producing a lot more insulin to compensate for the resistance because it can't get into the cells. And so you're going to be hungry all the time. Now, the higher the glycemic index, the faster the insulin spike, and the more that it drops down into the lower part right here. And so let's say, for example, you consume a bowl of rice, okay? And there's some type of sweet sauce on that. And you're at a restaurant, like a Chinese restaurant, and you consume that. It's like, maybe let's say it's a Thai restaurant, right? Because they have a lot of spicy, great foods, and it's with a lot of hidden sugar, and they also have MSG in there, which also spikes insulin. What's going to happen? You're going to feel really good for a while. You're going to feel satisfied, and then you're going to leave the restaurant, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, man, I'm hungry. Where did that come from? Well, what happened, it spiked your insulin, and now it's removing all that sugar. Now you're going to end up with low blood sugars. So you're probably going to go home and look for something sweet because you're hungry. Now, if you were to have a carbohydrate, like let's say a salad, that is a carb, it has fiber, but fiber has no response on your insulin, plus it's nutrient dense, you're not going to get this massive spike, probably like this, and it's not going to come down too far. So you're not going to get hungry after you consume a salad. Now, to stimulate the appetite, if you really wanted to stimulate your appetite, consume a lot of empty carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, breads, pasta, cereal, crackers, candy, things like that, sodas. And that's a great way to stimulate appetite because there's no nutrients in there to satisfy the brain. There's all sorts of receptors in the brain that are signaling and getting feedback from the food that you eat. And so one message that the brain's going to get to turn off hunger is, okay, we reached our amount of nutrients. If there's no nutrients in there, it's not going to turn off, and you're going to keep eating and eating and eating. This is why it's so easy to sit down and consume, a loaf of bread, and this is why it's so easy to sit down and consume a whole bunch of bread or refined carbs in one sitting. Like Doritos, for example. In college, I used to consume not just a small bag of Doritos, but the mega or bulk bag of Doritos. Literally, it was this big. I would sit down in one sitting and consume that whole thing. Why? Because I never got satisfied. It was just good. I just kept having it. And then I was so thirsty afterwards because I was so filled with sodium. My fingers would swell up because all that sodium and the fluid just kind of was retained. All right. Another thing that'll stimulate appetite is low-fat or lean protein. Why? Because low-fat protein will stimulate insulin. And the other thing is that fat satisfies you. And so if there's not enough fat to satisfy you, you're just doing protein, and that's going to stimulate an appetite. This is why snacking on lean protein or beef jerky in between meals is not a good idea. And then frequent eating. If you've been watching my videos, you've heard me say this a million times, but more frequent you eat, the greater the appetite. Why? Because every time you eat, you trigger insulin, regardless of what you eat. Now, this is how you satisfy your hunger. More fatty foods. Okay? Number 2, lower carbs. I've already covered that. 3, nutrient-dense foods. That also includes nutrient-dense carbs, as in vegetables, cruciferous, things like that. Seafood is very nutrient dense. Shellfish is extremely nutrient dense. Organ meats are extremely nutrient dense, very satisfying. Okay, the more fiber something has, for example, if you're doing vegetables and like celery, it's very rich with fiber, that is going to buffer the insulin response greatly. So you're not going to ever gain weight or have an insulin problem when you're consuming the carbohydrate celery. All right, bile. If you don't consume enough fat, which by the way is the trigger of bile production from your liver and stored in the gallbladder, you're going to end up with lower amounts of bile. And if you don't have enough bile, you can't extract some of the fat-soluble nutrients that are very satisfying to your body and also trigger your brain that you can turn off eating. And so having enough bile, having a healthy gallbladder, having a healthy liver can give you enough bile to give you more extraction of the certain nutrients that you need to satisfy the body. If you're deficient in bile, you're just going to feel hungrier. Okay, fasting. Now, if you're new to my channel, I'm just going to explain this. How can not eating get rid of hunger? Well, you're actually switching your metabolism from running on glucose, especially the dietary sugars and carbs, to running off your own body's fat. And to do that, there's a transition. It takes a little bit. Might take 3 days, but you're not fasting for 3 days. You're just going to not eat so frequently. And then what's going to happen, your body's going to convert over to running on fat, and your hunger is going to completely disappear. For those people that are new to my channel, I put a link down below of exactly what diet you should be on. The other cool thing about doing all of these things right here is that they fix insulin resistance. And the more you fix insulin resistance, the lower the insulin will go, the faster the metabolism will be, and the more satisfied you're going to be, because insulin resistance also blocks the nutrients from going into the cell. So if you have insulin resistance, especially if it's chronic, like a lot of people have, you're going to rarely be satisfied after you eat. So that's why you have to take additional nutrients to satisfy you. All right, thanks for watching.